Supercar brands are simultaneously raising prices and cutting exports, plunging the American supercar market into chaos. Is this the consequence of the new import tariff policy? As of April 3, 2025, a 25% import tariff on European cars officially took effect in the United States. In response, Porsche accelerated shipments ahead of the deadline, while Ferrari announced up to a 10% price increase on select models in the US to offset rising costs. Automakers like Porsche and Volvo have warned that car prices in the US will rise significantly unless tariffs are adjusted, especially for fully imported models. For consumers, owning a European car is becoming increasingly difficult, particularly as interest rates and living costs remain high. Not just luxury supercars, but also mid-range sedans and SUVs are expected to be affected, adding pressure to an already volatile auto market. The impact of the import tariff goes beyond car prices. It's hitting the labor market. Porsche plans to cut around 4,000 jobs in 2025, nearly 10% of its global workforce, in response to rising costs and declining U.S. demand. Auto suppliers in the U.S. have also warned that import tariffs could reduce sales, leading to layoffs at showrooms and dealerships, especially in regions that depend heavily on European car imports. For auto industry workers, technicians, sales staff, or logistics teams, this shift brings serious risks. Every closed showroom or lost order doesn't just reflect a number, it represents jobs, income, and livelihoods for thousands of Americans. After the U.S. imposed the vehicle import tariff in April 2025, average new car prices rose 2.5% that month, more than double the recent 1.1% monthly average. Weakened purchasing power pushed many buyers to the used car market, driving prices up. The Manheim Used Vehicle Value Index rose 4.9% year-over-year and 2.7% in April alone, its highest in 18 months. Luxury imports like watches, handbags, and fine wines have also seen sharp price hikes due to tariffs and limited supply. At the same time, the gray market, where unofficial imports are sold, is expanding as consumers seek ways to avoid rising costs. For high-income buyers and supercar enthusiasts, this is one of the hardest times to access luxury vehicles, both in price and availability. The 25% import tariff is triggering a chain reaction in the U.S. auto industry. European brands like Porsche, Volvo, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Volkswagen estimate U.S. vehicle prices could rise by $4,000 to $12,000 per model, depending on type and configuration. For Porsche, which imports all its cars from Europe, losses could reach hundreds of millions of euros in April and May 2025 alone, if prices aren't adjusted. Volvo reported a 59% profit drop and is implementing a $1.9 billion cost-cutting plan, including U.S. price hikes. Meanwhile, Ferrari and Lamborghini continue to post strong profits, backed by loyal, price-insensitive customers. But this underscores a growing divide. Ultra-luxury thrives, while mid-range and premium segments face pressure from tariffs, rising costs, and changing consumer behavior. Long-term, the policy may reshape U.S. car culture. Once known for affordability and variety, consumers may shift preferences, while automakers must rethink pricing and supply strategies to stay competitive.
EU diversifies partners, looks to internal market to counter potential 144 billion euros loss. Could these strategies safeguard Europe's supply chains and global standing against pressure from Washington? In 2023, the European Union was the world's largest trading power, accounting for 16.1% of global trade, valued at 7.6 trillion euros, according to Eurostat 2024. The US remains the EU's largest trade partner, representing 17% of EU trade, equating to 1.6 trillion euros. However, this trade relationship lacks any free trade agreement, FTA protection. Under former President Donald Trump, the U.S. imposed tariffs of up to 25% on imported cars from the EU and 10% across the board. Alarmingly, Trump's trade advisors are suggesting a return of a 20% tariff on all EU goods within the first 3 months if he re-enters the White House, according to Bloomberg. According to the European Commission, a retaliatory tariff war at 25% could reduce EU exports to the US by 17.5%, causing a direct loss of 0.54% of the EU's GDP, which is equivalent to 144 billion euros, according to a European Commission trade impact study. US consumers would face sharp price increases on imported goods from Europe, including cars, wine, and industrial equipment. The Brookings Institution predicts core inflation could rise by an additional 0.3 percentage points if these tariffs are reinstated, according to Brookings. To reduce dependency on the US, the EU is accelerating FTA negotiations with emerging economies. India is a top priority. If an FTA is concluded, the import tariff on cars could drop from over 100% to just 10%, according to Reuters. Bilateral trade between the EU and India is projected to reach 167 billion euros by 2026, with EU exports totaling 75 billion euros and imports from India reaching 93 billion euros. Additionally, a deal with Mercosur, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay could boost total trade to 126 billion euros, with the EU exporting 77 billion euros and importing 49 billion euros. For Mexico, improving market access alone could increase EU exports by 20%, or 10 billion euros. In total, if all 3 FTAs are approved before 2026, the EU could recover around 91 billion euros, though it would still fall 53 billion euros short of the losses from the US. Alongside expanding partnerships, the European Commission is calling for improvements to the EU's single market, established in 1993. While barriers to goods have been removed, 3 key pillars, services, capital, and labor, still face significant hurdles due to national laws. For example, Polish plumbers must recertify to practice in Belgium. Startups in Portugal struggle to raise funds from the Netherlands due to differing investment laws. And EU citizens face bureaucratic obstacles when working in other member states. According to a new study by the European Parliament, this lack of integration costs the EU 1.1 trillion euros annually, 279 billion euros from services, 415 billion euros from the digital market, 300 billion euros from goods, and 50 billion euros from public procurement, according to European Parliament policy study. If reforms are implemented, the EU could fully recover the 144 billion euros loss from US tariffs, while also boosting its internal competitiveness. The United States has just imposed a 20% tariff on goods from the European Union, while the United Kingdom faces a lower rate of 10%. This raises the question: why is Northern Ireland, once regarded as stable after Brexit, now at the center of this latest trade tension? On April 9, 2025, President Donald Trump announced a new wave of import tariffs, targeting nearly all of the United States' trade partners, referring to the move as Liberation Day. In this announcement, the European Union, EU, faces significantly increased costs, with a 20% tariff applied to all goods exported to the US, totaling over $500 billion in 2024. In contrast, the United Kingdom is subject to a lower rate of just 10%, with an export value of around $78 billion, clearly gaining a distinct advantage. The discrepancy in tariff rates between the EU and the UK creates an imbalance in the competitiveness of European countries within the US market, particularly in sectors such as pharmaceuticals, where EU exports reached $104 billion, along with premium consumer goods and technology. This also partly reflects President Trump's strategy of differentiation, as he has consistently emphasized close ties with the UK as it remains within the EU's customs union and single market under the Northern Ireland Plus Protocol, which is part of the Brexit agreement. This intermediary position makes Northern Ireland especially vulnerable to disruptions arising from international trade conflicts. Should the Plus EU formally implement retaliatory tariffs, goods arriving from the Plus United Plus states into Northern Ireland would be required to comply with stricter regulations and customs inspections, adding an average of +2 to +5 days in clearance time, and increasing logistics costs by +8 to +12%. According to a report by the Plus London Plus Institute for Plus Trade Plus Policy. This means that the EU's retaliatory tariffs against the Plus United Plus states could, in effect, be enforced within Plus Northern Plus Ireland, beyond economic consequences. The issue also carries political implications, particularly for the Plus Unionist community in Northern Ireland, where more than +44% of the population supports maintaining the Union with Great Britain, and where there is ongoing concern about being separated from the rest of the Plus United Plus Kingdom. Under the Plus Windsor Plus framework, signed in the Plus March 2023 between the Plus United Plus Kingdom and the Plus European Plus Union, goods entering Plus Northern Plus Ireland are divided into 2 lanes. Plus Green Lane, applied to goods intended solely for domestic consumption within Plus Northern Plus Ireland, exempt from customs checks. Plus Red Lane, applied to goods that may enter the Plus EU market via the Plus Republic of Plus Ireland, subject to mandatory checks and compliance with Plus EU standards. This lane-based system now faces the risk of disruption if trade tensions between the Plus United States and the Plus European Plus Union continue to escalate, if the Plus EU imposes retaliatory tariffs on the Plus United States through Plus Trade Plus Defense Plus instruments, then under Plus Article 7.2.2 of the Plus Windsor Plus framework, all affected goods would be automatically redirected to the Plus Red Lane. According to estimates from the Plus EU minus UK Plus Joint Plus Committee, approximately 17% of Plus US imports into Plus Northern Plus Ireland in 2024, valued at more than £1.1 billion, could be impacted. All goods from the Plus United States entering Northern Plus Ireland would be subject to strict customs checks, even if there is no intention for those goods to enter the Plus EU. During a questioning session in the Plus UK Plus Parliament last week, Gavin B. Robinson, leader of the Plus Democratic Unionist Plus Party, Plus DUP, publicly expressed concern over the potential impact of the Plus EU's retaliatory tariffs on the region. He emphasized that while Plus Northern Plus Ireland remains a part of the Plus United Plus Kingdom, import regulations could still be influenced by the Plus European Plus Union if retaliatory measures were to be implemented. The disruption of internal trade caused by Plus EU policies, even though Plus Northern Plus Ireland is constitutionally part of the Plus UK, could have a negative effect on the confidence of the Plus Unionist community, which has already experienced significant strain following Plus Brexit. Car prices are rising, jobs are gradually disappearing, and Americans are struggling in the midst of a shifting economic landscape. What is happening to the auto industry, once the pride of the United States? Tariffs and protectionist trade policies have driven production costs sharply higher, pushing the price of American-made vehicles to record levels. According to Edmunds, by early 2025, the average price of a new car has surpassed $50,000 USD, while used vehicles are nearing $32,000 USD. With incomes failing to keep pace, many consumers are left with no choice but to hold on to older cars, even as maintenance costs continue to rise. Cox Automotive reports that a standard oil change once around 50 USD, now exceeds 100 USD. Hourly wage earners and those on fixed incomes are bearing the brunt of this burden, particularly as broader living costs, from groceries to gasoline, rise in tandem with the new wave of tariffs. McKinsey notes that 75% of American consumers have shifted to buying cheaper goods, primarily food, due to tightening household budgets. At the same time, unemployment is spreading. The manufacturing sector is seeing a jobless rate of 5.2%. Construction has shed 34,000 jobs, and agriculture has experienced a 3.8% reduction in its workforce. These losses stem from rising raw material costs, declining export demand, and widespread order cancellations, all of which are forcing families to cut back on spending, weakening purchasing power across the broader economy. As American car prices rise and deliveries slow due to parts shortages, Japanese and Korean automakers are gaining ground, thanks to competitive pricing and more agile supply chains. In 2024, Toyota captured 12.5% of the US market. Hyundai Kia held 10.2%, and Honda accounted for 8.1%. These vehicles are known for their durability and fuel efficiency, qualities especially valued amid the steep increase in fuel prices, driven by new import tariffs. Hyundai has announced plans to invest 21 billion USD by 2028 to build electric vehicle and steel manufacturing facilities, expected to create an additional 100,000 jobs and stimulate regional economies. In contrast, many American automakers have been forced to scale back production due to rising costs, leading to widespread layoffs. This has reduced consumer access to domestic models, while further pushing up the price of American-made cars. The shift toward Japanese and Korean vehicles also reflects a broader trend, a trend toward more frugal consumer behavior. With U.S. economic growth projected to slow to 1.4% in 2025, down from 2.2% previously, according to McKinsey, many Americans are adjusting their spending habits in anticipation of leaner times. The 25% import tariff has driven up car prices by an average of 13.5%, or roughly 6,400 USD per new vehicle. This price spike not only strains consumers, but also directly affects manufacturing and exports. Ford has halted exports of the F-150, Mustang, and Bronco to China in response to retaliatory tariffs of 150%. Stellantis has laid off 900 workers across 5 plants, while Volvo has announced job cuts ranging from 550 to 800 positions. Current trade policies are weakening the U.S. auto industry, leading to declining revenues, job losses, and reduced access to domestic vehicles for American consumers. Without timely adjustments, U.S. market share for American-made cars could fall below 40% within the next 5 years. The inflationary pressure driven by tariffs is also spreading to other sectors. In agriculture, the unemployment rate surged to 12% in March 2025, the highest in years. This reflects the broader, cascading impacts on the overall economy and the daily lives of millions of Americans. China has just halted all capital flows into the United States. This is triggering a shockwave across the global financial landscape. Businesses are reeling. Prices are on the rise. Could this be the beginning of a silent yet significant currency war? According to Bloomberg, as of March 17, 2025, China has officially banned outbound capital flows to so-called hostile countries, including the United States. This expansion of its capital control policy has brought Chinese foreign direct investment in the U.S., which had already fallen from $46 billion in 2016 to just $2.3 billion in 2023, down to virtually zero. At the same time, China has continued to sell off U.S. Treasury bonds, offloading $14 billion worth in 2024 and reducing its total holdings to $775 billion, its lowest level since 2016. A continued reduction in Chinese demand for U.S. bonds could put upward pressure on interest rates. That means higher borrowing costs for homes, vehicles, and credit cards for American consumers. Conversely, in the first quarter of 2025, China increased its investments in ASEAN nations by $19.4 billion. This shift may enhance Southeast Asia's ability to attract infrastructure and technology investment. Additionally, China has accelerated the use of its digital yuan, which is now integrated with the SWIFT light payment network in 13 countries. This enables transactions without using the US dollar. In 2023, foreign direct investment into the United States hit $148.8 billion, a 28% drop compared to 2022. That's well below the 2014 to 2022 average of $265.6 billion. This downturn has made it harder for businesses to expand and hire, especially in manufacturing, where foreign capital is crucial, and that's putting pressure on employment and household income. As of December 4th, 2024, just $59 billion in new high-yield or junk bonds were issued, lowest level in over a decade. Nearly 80% of that used for refinancing, not growth. It shows a widespread sense of caution among investors and corporate leaders. Meanwhile, average interest rates on junk bonds jumped from 5.2% in 2022 to 9.6% in 2024. Borrowing is now way more expensive. That means businesses may scale back on investments, cut hiring plans. And that could mean fewer job opportunities and higher consumer prices. In summary, the slide in FDI and the contraction of the junk bond market are putting serious financial stress on businesses. Market confidence is taking a hit. And the cost? It's showing up in everyday life. Cost of living is rising. Income stability is slipping. Several major projects in the United States have stalled due to a lack of capital from China and Taiwan. We're talking about an $8 billion battery plant in Michigan, a $3.1 billion robotics center in Nevada, and Intel's massive $20 billion project in Ohio. These delays are hitting employment and income hard, especially in the states where these projects were set to roll out. Right now, 62% of U.S. businesses planning to expand production are reporting a shortage of foreign investment. This has forced many of their plans to be postponed. That means fewer jobs and a slower recovery for domestic manufacturing. Beginning March 4th, 2025, the U.S. increased import tariffs on a wide range of goods from China from 10% to 20%. While aimed at supporting domestic production, this move has led to a sharp rise in consumer prices, particularly for household appliances, which have risen by 16.7% year over year. Inflation is projected to hit 3% in 2025, the highest level in several years. That's pushing households to tighten spending. Big time. According to the National Retail Federation, American families could see an extra $1,950 in expenses for goods by the end of the year. American farmers are enduring a brutal economic fallout from trade wars with exports, collapsing production costs, soaring, and no solutions in sight. Can the U.S. agriculture sector survive this disaster? Sorghum exports to China have dropped 95%. In just 2 months of 2025, U.S. sorghum exports plummeted from 1.4 million tons to just 78,000 tons compared to the previous year. China once bought 90% of U.S. sorghum, but the market has vanished almost overnight. Other major crops like soybeans, corn, and wheat are also suffering, with prices falling and stockpiles growing. This sharp decline in demand is leaving U.S. farmers with millions of tons of unsold crops in silos, significantly hurting cash flow. The lack of buyers is pushing family-owned farms to the brink of extinction, especially as prices continue to plummet with no market alternatives in sight. China has raised tariffs to over 125% on a broad range of U.S. agricultural products, including soybeans, pork, corn, cotton, and dairy. In addition, the EU has also imposed 25% tariffs on key U.S. farm exports, like soybeans and processed pork, in retaliation for U.S. steel tariffs. Countries like Brazil, Argentina, and Russia are now filling the gaps left by the U.S., signing long-term trade deals that are shifting global supply chains. Permanently, farmers are seeing their once dominant positions in global markets erode with tariffs, pricing U.S. goods out of major markets like China. The agricultural sector faces long-term structural losses that will be hard to recover from. American farmers are now competing with cheaper products from other nations, leaving them vulnerable to further losses. A New York dairy farmer is facing an additional $2,200 in costs for livestock feed due to new tariffs on Canadian imports. Prices for fertilizers, seeds, and machinery are all on the rise because of tariffs on U.S. trading partners, putting immense pressure on farmers' budgets. Meanwhile, crop prices are falling, creating a double squeeze on U.S. farmers' profits. The escalating costs of production are making it increasingly difficult for farmers to turn a profit. With the prices of essential farm inputs like feed and fertilizer rising, and crop prices declining, many farmers are struggling to cover their basic operating expenses. The economic pressure is mounting, threatening their ability to stay afloat. Rural banks are warning of rising default risks as farmers face growing pressure from unstable crop prices and mounting debt. Many farmers are hesitant to sign contracts due to market volatility, fearing they will grow crops no one will buy. Despite some calls for new bailout packages worth billions, many farmers are voicing a preference for trade deals over government checks. As the financial crisis deepens, farmers are facing a real threat of bankruptcy. The increasing instability in the agricultural sector is putting banks and small rural economies at risk. The proposed government relief packages are seen as short-term solutions, with no clear path to restore long-term market access and stability. The United States and China have entered a new phase of confrontation with a wave of record-high tariffs, triggering widespread manufacturing freezes and mass job reductions. What is truly happening, and who is bearing the brunt of the consequences? Since March 2025, the U.S. has raised import tariffs to 145% on a wide range of Chinese goods, including textiles, electronics, and auto parts. In response, China imposed a 125% tariff on U.S. products, escalating trade tensions and disrupting global supply chains. Losing access to the U.S., which made up about 15% of China's exports in 2024, has forced many factories in Guangdong and Zhejiang to cut hours or shut down entirely. Many workers have returned to their hometowns due to job losses. Domestically, production has declined amid weak consumer demand. China's CPI fell 0.1% in March, while the PPI dropped 2.5%. The fourth straight month of decline. Industrial electricity use in key manufacturing regions fell 7 to 10%, signaling a clear slowdown. Meanwhile, U.S. consumers are feeling the effects as prices for Chinese imports rise. 5 to 12% households in states like California and New York are reassessing spending, especially on electronics and clothing. Following the 145% U.S. tariffs, about 15% of China's exports have been affected. Factories in Guangdong, Zhejiang, and Fujian are cutting production or suspending operations entirely. Canceled U.S. orders have led to rotational layoffs, lower incomes, and a wave of workers returning to their hometowns. Due to job shortages, Goldman Sachs estimates up to 20 million workers, that's 3% of China's labor force, could lose their jobs if exports keep falling. Small and medium-sized businesses, heavily reliant on U.S. orders, are facing widespread bankruptcies. The impact extends to young workers,